How's everybody doing? This is Tony Moze, the rhyming book reviewer, and I have none other than the co-author of The One Thing, Jay Papasan. And he is not only the co-author, he is a vice president of Keller Inc., which is a publishing company, which is an arm of Keller Williams Realty. All right. So once again, Jay, thank you so much for coming on the show.
Hey, thanks for having me. I appreciate that you're such a huge fan of the book, and we want to write the books to create an impact, and just these little moments where it resonates back are pretty thrilling for us.
It's awesome. So if you guys do not know yet, I have written a rhyming book review, actually recorded a rhyming book review video, and that is also will be, I think, on an audio version as well of The One Thing. So I do rhyming book reviews for all of you newbies out there who are just coming to exposure of who I am, and I like talking with awesome, amazing people. So once again, we'll get into this really quick. Since my channel, Jay, it attracts entrepreneurs, book readers, as well as younger groups of people, I would like to ask the simple yet profound question: why is it important to focus on the one thing?
Well, I think the reason we wrote it is at no other time in my lifetime, and certainly not Gary's, have we had so many opportunities, to do new things, and also in many ways obligations. A lot of us feel it every single day. Our to-do lists are really long. Our calendars are booked up, and the ability to make great choices with our number one investment, which is our time. It's the only thing that doesn't get renewed, right? If we don't do it this year, there's no guarantee that a year gets added to the end of our lives that we'll get to do it later. You just may not get to do that thing. And so how we invest our time matters a lot. And so the one thing fundamentally is a resource for people to make better investments of their time and hopefully make those on a regular basis, to do the things that matter most for their career, for their work, for their family, their health. And whether the great byproduct of that, it means you're not doing all the other junk. And
Yeah.
I've found it to be a huge relief in my life to be able to just say no to things easier because I've said yes to things more meaningfully.
So I of course I definitely checked out a lot of your stuff, a lot of your other talks, and I don't want to ever get repetitive.
Mm-hmm.
But the question I just want to magnify that idea, because I think people, and I've seen that this is a theme throughout your books and also your talks, about the idea of focus. And if focus was a form of currency, how many people would you think are poor?
Oh gosh, we're impoverished right now. I think our focus meanders a lot. So it'd be kind of like high income people that spend all of their money and a little bit more. Because we have all of these things calling for our attention and probably being called on to use it more than ever, in the history of mankind. But it's also divided down between our cell phones and all the other things that are distracting us. So yeah, I think that's a great way of putting it. I think we've got a poverty problem, but it's more like the millionaire next door. The people who you think are rich are often the poorest. They've got all this stuff happening, but it's just flowing out between their fingers.
It's true. I look at my. I don't want, of course, make it anonymous, but one of the cadre at the university that I'm at, she definitely has this idea that, I'm gonna drink my coffee or eat my food, work on 2-3 kids' theses, and then also email at the same time. And it really looked so beautiful. It looked like you said, the millionaire next door, the person who looks on the outside wealthy but is in this sense poor. And she's doing all these things, but when it comes to making appointments with this individual, it's just so tough because this person really overwhelms herself with so many things. So yeah, I see that whole idea about focusing on that one thing and how it's really important. What made you find your one thing?
It took me a long time. When I look at my entire life, 2/3 of it, I think I was being drawn towards something that I couldn't have really articulated, or I wasn't brave enough to articulate. I've always wanted to be a writer, but I wasn't really pursuing it. I was just working in the book world. The last 15 years, I've been a lot more purposeful. So I'm going to give the credit to my co-author, Gary Keller. I think that working with him crystallized for me how important it is to get clear about what it is you really want. when I used to teach this book, it says the extraordinarily simple truth behind, success. And success is just getting what you want. And on its simplest level, getting what you want means you're successful. It's not about having $1 million, because if you don't want that, that's not a success for you. But it is a problem for most people, because if you really pin them down, they don't know what they want. There's still that challenge inherent. And I can tell you I was guilty. For a lot of my life, I kind of knew what direction I wanted to go in, but I didn't have a lot of clarity around it. And working elbow to elbow with that guy, you start to get clear. You understand the importance of having a better vision for your life, and then working backwards to what you have to do. So, like I said, I'm as guilty as anyone, but I think a lot of us don't have that clarity, and that clarity drives us forward.
Yeah. Idea just popped up when you were talking about that with the clarity and also working with Gary on this. It sounds like the idea of collaboration definitely helped you find your one thing. And so I'm thinking about philosophers out there where Buddhist philosophers talking about you need to go inside, figure out what you really want in life. But could you also stress that there is an importance to having a team of people helping you to get to your successful point?
If the question is not how I did it, but how would you advise someone to do it? Yeah, I think it's a little bit of both. I usually tell people you need some quiet time. A lot of times the answer is in front of us, but we don't stop and actually ask the question and give ourselves a little time for it to come into focus. So maybe take yourself to a cafe, get a glass of wine, it's in the evening, or a glass of tea in the morning, get out your journal and reflect upon the kinds of things and activities that have really brought you joy in your life. And it's not just about, being happy, right? It's about fulfillment. And we write about that in the book. And so I think we often see clues there. And then you can go to the people who know you best. Like, I love my spouse. Wendy knows me better than I know myself. And whenever I'm in doubt, I can ask her, I think I'm kind of like this. Is that right? And she's like, no, you're fooling yourself. Or, absolutely, how could you not know that? And so your best friends, your spouse, you can say, hey, I think that why I'm here is for this, that I really need to be helping people. Whatever that looks like, I need to be doing that. They can bring a lot of validation and confirmation. And if you're completely lost, I've actually heard a lot.
Hello.
What is, help me out with this. It's a little serious. It's a little heavy, which is why you go to your close friends. But they can say, dude, you were meant to write books. You don't see that? A lot of times people from the outside do see us better than we see ourselves. But I would start with yourself and then reflect it out so that you're not putting all the labor on them.
God, thank you. So let's see, jumping back and forth, but I liked what you said earlier, and it has me thinking too, even for myself. I like how you said in another chat that the common misconception people have with your and Gary Keller's book is that people confuse the one thing with it being the only thing.
Yeah.
And it's not. And it's not about the only thing. I like this concept of the one thing, but I feel people could bring this up for a philosophical debate, such as myself. Sometimes people can get a little confused by what is their one thing. For example, I like doing rhyming book reviews. I feel it can be not only entertaining but educational, right. And I like exposing people on the great books that are out there, which I feel is educational too. I also like to motivate people through coaching, which I feel is educational. When I tried to think of my one thing, I felt that all three things I described were part of just one concept: education. And what revolves around that is my social media, where I promote this one idea, one thing of education, but I feel I can get overwhelmed. Is this how I could categorize my one thing? Am I just making excuses? How can we redirect individuals into knowing their one thing?
Well, I think this is a case of it being a little bit of art, and more so than it being a science. But I do agree that in general, especially for the first two, your rhyming, book reviews, you use the words, they help people, right? They educate people. And then obviously that's what coaching's about, right? And coaching tends to be a little bit more outcome oriented, getting results for people. Social media might be just something that you enjoy and also might be a necessary evil so that you can promote the first two services. So we talk about lining up your dominoes. That's the main metaphor, like in the beginning of the book, and it shows up again and again. But it's this idea that if you line up a bunch of dominoes, you can knock over one and get a bunch to fall down. It doesn't mean they all fall down every time. But what we want people doing is, at the very least, even if doing one doesn't make the other things happen automatically, it might make them easier, and it certainly means that they're aligned, right? So I could see how all three of the activities you just listed are aligned. You know, the first two, right, or the first and last, the rhyming and the social media, could be in part educational, but fundamentally, I see them as marketing, right? Oh, yes. Did you hear about that rhyming book review? Like it's word of mouth, right? It's just novel enough that gets people to talk about and maybe want to share, that leads them to the deeper value proposition, which is where you probably also get paid, which is the coaching. And I could see you aligning those very easily and then justifying making regular investments of time and making a battle around those three things happening on a regular basis. That's not too many things, by the way.
Great. I've been trying to consolidate all of many things that I love doing, because sometimes I remember you said in a talk that as a child you were trying to memorize all the Trivial Pursuit questions and answers. I mean, that's something that I would like to do. I mean, I feel like I want to take over the world, but I know that there's only so much time in my life that I can do all that. So like me trying to figure that out within the three things that I do is just definitely was very important to figuring that out.
Well, we can both rule out the Trivial Pursuit, right? It might be nice to win the game, but it doesn't truly align with the others, right? To be a great interview, you don't have to know all the answers. You just have to ask good questions. Yeah. And so the same thing as being an author. Like, I mean, the truth is today, this is way after the old Trivial Pursuit. It's like, if you want the answer to something, Google it. Right. So we don't have to know everything anymore. So, but that's just reality. And sometimes it takes a coach, or again, that spouse, that peer partner, that person who's willing to be honest with you, to kind of reflect back. It's like, dude, you said social media. That doesn't mean every channel available. Like you look at Seth Godin. He's one of the most successful social media people out there. How many channels can you find him on? Do you know?
I mean, I know he's on podcasts. I know he's on YouTube. But in terms of how many channels on YouTube or podcasts, I can only guess on a handful.
Well, I think he only made a stand around, he blogs. That's his main thing. I think he actually is the guy that's on his Twitter. And I think he leaves everything else for other people. And it might be that he's now added YouTube. I'm not aware. But he was one of the first guys that's like, you don't have to be successful at Google Plus and Facebook and Twitter and LinkedIn and Periscope. Pick what works best for you and be good at that. And that's kind of what I'm saying. Like, social media is kind of a big bucket. So pick what works for you, what aligns with your dominoes, and then, either be conscious yourself, or hopefully there'll be people around you to kind of hold you accountable. It's like, okay, now you're just having fun, and you're calling it work, but you're just having fun now.
And you know what, Jay? It's so true, because you know what? I'm trying to put myself in the minds of the youth who are watching, and they're primed with all the things especially if it's their most popular entrepreneur, and they see that this guy's living, or this woman is living a great life. They look at their Snapchat, their Instagram, their Twitter, and they see them going to basketball games and doing this and doing that. Sometimes it gets to the point where you're wondering, what the hell does this person do? What do they do? And of course, because these are like the leaders of our times right now, we follow, we emulate them. So I see some of these people that I look up to, and I'm like, okay, is this what I got to do? Okay, I got to go out and go do this, and I got to do that. And even just work-wise, like just saying, okay, I'm doing my rhyming book reviews, but perhaps I have to go above and beyond and be, Mr. Flashy Bling Bling with how I'm marketing or promoting my stuff, And I think what you're saying is like, it doesn't necessarily have to be that outlandish of things, right?
No. It's actually almost always fewer than you think. Mm-hmm. We can rationalize doing more because we enjoy them, or we rationalize doing more because we're afraid that we'll be judged for not doing them. It's just the reality of it. And I suffer from this as much as anyone, and which is why, we regularly come back to the book and try to minimize. We regularly come back to the principles in the book and ask, Pareto's principle of the 10 things we're doing around this book launch, like what's really driving things? I get, especially in the beginning, we experiment, right? Young people need to try new things to find out what they indeed like to do and they're good and talented at. But then you need to come back and narrow so that you can give more energy to the handful of things that are really getting you the results that you want. Keeps you sane. And by the way, it can make you mad talented at those handful of things too if you do them long enough.
Yeah. It wasn't until after undergrad where I found out the beauty of less is more when it came to writing. Because in high school, we were taught to just fluff it up, just add extra stuff. And the more you could say and BS, the higher your grade. At least that was the perception of many of us. Mm-hmm. And then I got to graduate school, and then I had a professor who just massacred my paper. But from that, I learned, and I went, wow, this is amazing. This is what many people do not want to read endless fluff. They want to get you to get right to the point.
Yeah, I've been there, done that. I remember I had a writing professor at NYU, which we were talking about before the live stuff, trying to think of his name now, but we would study different authors, and then instead of writing a paper about where, Sir Arthur Conan Doyle was born and raised in his pivotal moments, we had to write 4 or 5 pages of a short story in that author's voice. So we had to imitate Faulkner, we had to imitate Hemingway, all those. And I can tell you, Faulkner, who's known for writing really long sentences and having lots of big words and long stuff, was much easier to imitate than Hemingway, who was incredibly spare. And that's where I kind of learned that lesson, that there is beauty in the art of accomplishing something with less instead of just more. It actually is harder to do. It's harder for me, and that's why you do this thing, rhyming, poems, essentially. I'd rather write a novel than a poem in some ways, because you're being judged in chapters. When you boil it down to just a couple of lines of verse, every word, every sound actually matters. And so the stakes get a lot higher when you bring things down. Very true. Now, I'm kind of inside baseball. That's writer talk, so you brought that on.
All right, game on. All right, so going back to the book, you're behind the scenes, actually, in terms of all the books. You're behind the scenes in other books. I'd like to know, what other books have you helped put out together besides The Millionaire Investor, or if just any kind of way?
Yeah, well, we've done about, I want to say 12 books total, and not all of them have seen the public eye. Our first book was The Millionaire Real Estate Agent, which is a career guide for real estate professionals. That sold close to 1 million copies since 2003 when it came out. Then The Millionaire Real Estate Investor. Then we partnered with some investors to create a book called Flip, which is obviously about flipping. We've since gone back and written one called Hold, which is about buy and hold strategies. We wrote a book called Shift that does bear our names. That was also a bestseller. And that was for real estate professionals operating in the really down market that we just came out of. And then some other obscure stuff. Like I worked with a guy on a book on Shift Commercial, which was how commercial agents should navigate that. My best buddy, Ben Kenny, and I wrote a book on social media that we gave away. It was called Social. And it's still kind of relevant. I actually am being asked to speak on it next month. And it just shows up every now and then. And we wrote it for free and won like a book award, but we never sold it. So there's like a bunch of little titles like that. One other one that's really obscure was on alternative financing for investment properties that we just kind of self-published.
Okay.
We've been busy. We write about a book every year and a half.
Yeah. That is grinding it out right there. That's amazing. So let's see. Yeah, somebody's going, what? Wow. Yeah, that's a lot of books. See, there's a lot of things that we don't know. We see in the forefront on Amazon and other places, okay, these are the things that are going on, but little do we know what goes on behind the scenes. And that's amazing. Now, as far as the book, The One Thing, I see this book has gone global. I'm seeing it in a few different languages published. How many languages is the book currently published at?
I think it's been translated 26 times if you count British English. We sold the rights to Great Britain, and they changed a few words. But so 26 territories, 25 languages.
Wow.
Yeah, I love it. It's by far the most translated work that we've done.
That is amazing. Wow, that's just amazing. And the fact that you went to school for France and you're working in publishing and writing, it had me wonder if you were one of the editors for the French version.
Oh, no way. I'll leave that to paid adults. Well, I mean, it's like it's one thing to be capable. It's another thing to be capable of doing it on a professional level. I've seen what great translation looks like. I've seen what bad translation in English looks like, right? I mean, you've been to a restaurant where the menu is barely intelligible, and you're like, boy, they could have used a professional. So yeah, I'll leave that to the professionals. I'd like for the great French people to have the best possible opinion of our book, and that usually means that someone's going to be between us and them.
Yeah. There was a talk, you said that when it comes to writing a business book, it needs to be both enlightening and give the individual the ability to want to take action.
Yeah.
What was your first read that enlightened you and influenced you into taking action?
I think when Gary and I kind of arrived we were working together in the very beginning. This is back in the summer of 2002. And we were mapping out, like, what were our favorite books? And what were the books that we felt were both instructive and they were insightful? And like Body for Life was a book I'd worked on, and it had changed kind of his paradigm and my paradigm about weight loss and exercise. So it had a paradigm change, but it also was very prescriptive. It told you what to do to get the results that you wanted. And we just kind of agreed that that's the kind of authors that we wanted to be. I'll tell you, a great book that doesn't fit that bill that we both cited is we both had loved, Rich Dad, Poor Dad by Robert Kiyosaki, because it's a big paradigm changing book. It changes the way you look at money. But I remember expressing to him, I said, but I got to the end of that book and I was very frustrated because I didn't know what to do. And he goes, exactly. And so it's a great book and it sells every year for a reason. But I carried a different expectation, I guess, than the average reader. I didn't want you just to change how I thought. I want to change the way I act. That's why I'm reading to begin with. And so we try to write books that fit both of those descriptions.
That's great. Switching gears really quick, real estate, just because I'm in the process of moving out myself. I'm just happily renting at this moment because I'm just trying to change pace, change life, formerly from New York, live in Connecticut now, but trying to move back to New York because I just feel that's where my calling is right now.
Right.
But in terms of real estate, like, when should one go ahead and purchase a mortgage and when should one stick with renting a place?
It's a very individual answer, but I'll give you some broad parameters with that caveat. Like I would always say, ask a professional, like a local realtor. That's what my wife does every day, and she works hard to make great decisions with her clients. But in general, if someone was going to move to a new area and they weren't sure, like absolutely sure they were going to stay for at least 3 years, a lot of times the math works out that they'd be better off renting. Because the time frame for most properties to appreciate or for you to have paid down the debt enough to at least have reclaimed your closing costs, right? Mm-hmm. What you don't want to do is buy a house and then have to write a check to sell it. So the math around 3 years is usually where that shows up. The reality is, if you think about you're going to have to pay for shelter regardless, if you have a pretty good chance that you're going to stick around, it might be more of a gamble towards the buy side, because now you didn't also sink 3 years of money into paying down someone else's mortgage. But I do think there's a time frame. Like, how long are you going to be there is a big question, and whether or not you can afford it. I mean, we saw a lot of people buy something they couldn't afford in the last downturn. So you've got to be able to afford it with or without any appreciation. You can't bank on the price of the home you're living in going up. Your home is shelter first, investment second. So get a good one, get one that you can afford. Hopefully it'll turn into a great investment for you as well. But I see it as a better way to pay the rent. Like, instead of paying someone else's mortgage down, at least you're paying your own down, and you get some good tax benefits from owning as well.
Right. Yeah, so I've been in that culture because I don't necessarily want a house, but I wouldn't mind having a condominium. That's just my lifestyle for now.
Well,
but
we can go farther into that. We can do that offline. But I would just say, on the whole renting thing, like, you're moving to New York. That's a very special market. It's very expensive to own there, period. So that would also be a special consideration. But yeah, if you can and it makes sense, I love ownership. We have a whole generation of people that appears to want to rent things. Like, even hey, I'd rather Uber than own a car. Like this whole borrowed society. And I just told my wife, if that's the way things are going, great. I will be happily everyone else's landlord because it is a very safe way to make a lot of money. But, you know, play the cards for yourself, and hopefully you can get into some form of ownership when it makes sense for you, Tony.
Great. Thank you, Jay. Okay, so going back to you and school and how you went to France and you were writing short stories then, like I was really interested in like what kind of stories were you writing around those times, and who were you reading that was inspiring you then?
Well, I was writing bad stories, right? Because they didn't get published. They got me into graduate school, but they were just okay, right? I was a fledgling writer. Gosh, who did I love to read? I loved Hemingway back then. I could not approach his kind of writing. I liked a guy named Dennis Johnson a lot. I liked kind of darker, hard-boiled stuff, Dashiell Hammett, stuff with good dialogue, and kind of usually on the darker end of society, you know, just whatever reason I was drawn to that stuff. But that was that back then. There's a guy named Rick Bass that I read obsessively too. Like I just got obsessed with certain authors, would read tons of them and write a little bit like them. What I learned from all of that is that I really do love playing with the written word. And I've since learned that I get a lot of my creativity expressed through nonfiction as well, which was a big surprise to me. But yeah, that was lots of mystery, kind of hard-boiled detective kind of short stories.
Wow. So I mean, I feel like you're coming from two different types of worlds. I mean, I don't know. Once again, it's been a while since I've been reading fictional books.
Right.
From what I've seen, it seems like Hemingway was writing a lot of nonfiction books.
No. I mean, I think he wrote some, but I think he's fiction author. I mean, I love to read fiction. I still read fiction. I think fiction's important, and it teaches us about people and relationships. And there's a lot that, you know, there's a reason that stories are, you know, before we had books, that's how we related history to each other. We made up stories and told them to explain how everything worked. And so it's a fundamental kind of way that we communicate. I love nonfiction too, because I want to read to learn and grow. Today, I set a yearly goal of reading about a book a week, about 50 books a year. And I try to alternate between a good novel and a great nonfiction book. And I even have a little shelf right over here in my office where I kind of stage up the books that I hope to read this year. And it forces me to look at them. You know, am I reading this because it's going to be entertainment, or is this like, I need to be going deeper into this topic and really understanding it? But it's just there to remind me I'm looking, and I've still got a good 15 nonfiction books that I'm intending to get to this year.
Okay. So you have me ask this question. Now I'm thinking about that just now. There's been a rivalry amongst the nonfiction readers versus the fictional readers. And the idea is that, especially around entrepreneurs who generally read, at least I've seen around my peers in that sector, they read a lot of nonfiction books. And a lot of them have said, fictional books are not needed. They're a bunch of fluff, you know, a bunch of crap. I mean, there's many renditions of what people would say for responses. But I don't know. I'm kind of weary of that idea. So what is your take? Not only just for entrepreneurs or even those in generally who read nonfiction books. Is fictional books needed? I mean, do we believe that we should be also incorporating a little bit of that into our lives?
Well, I mean, I love it. I think it's a form of art. I think a lot of people, if you're watching Netflix movies to fall asleep at night, it's not a good recipe, right? Because we all know the impact of staring at screens right before we go to sleep. So I've actually heard from a fair number of top-level entrepreneurs, including, you know, my partner Gary. Like, I got him reading fiction. I turned him on to some books, and I said, you know, instead of watching TV at the end of the night, you know, like, check this book out. You won't be able to close it. And a lot of people will then take the last hour before the lights go out for good to read a book in bed, and really wind down, and you go internal, and there is something peaceful about it. It's very relaxing, and it's a lot healthier than some of the other things that we do before bedtime. But that is where if you're really hardcore entrepreneurs and there's no other use for it, it's a way to unwind and relax and still preserve a really high quality of your sleep. Beyond that, I would tell you, I'm not talking about just James Patterson novels, right? There are lots of books that are about just escapism and entertainment, but there are also great novels that teach us about the human condition and open our eyes to different viewpoints. And, you know, I mean, Hemingway wrote about things the way nobody else could. For Whom the Bell Tolls. I mean, that's just one of the best war stories of all time. You can go out and read those books and, you know, just look in the classics section. They're currency in our life. They allow us to shortcut and talk about, you know, it's the Iliad and the Odyssey of this or that. We can compare notes because they're common currency across many languages. So I think there's great value in that. And, you know, but you don't have to go read the Dubliners. You don't have to make it like a hardship on yourself to go read the hardest stuff out there. A lot of it's still incredibly entertaining and very enriching at the same time. So I'll defend literature all day long.
Yeah. And one thing I pose to people, too, is that fictional books, I mean, when you say entrepreneur, that's very general. I mean, it depends. There's some, I mean, I would say you need a lot of creativity to be one. But then again, what I'm doing,
Yes.
I need a lot of creativity. So reading fictional books will help add more to my creativity. So I think fictional books is definitely a necessary evil.
One of the things that I do is like, here's like an example of how I read. Like if I know I'm traveling and I'm going to Italy, I'll go to the bookstore or I'll go online and I'll ask like, what are some great books that are set in the area of the world that I'm going? And so maybe I'll read Umberto Eco's The Name of the Rose, which is a fabulous book set in kind of the Renaissance in Italy. And so while I'm technically reading an entertaining mystery, because it was written by one of the greats, like there's a lot of historical fiction in it. Like there's real history buried in there and real knowledge about cathedrals and monks. And I remember this because when I was in Italy like 4 years ago, I read that and I read The Pillars of Foundation, which is like a Ken Follett epic about building cathedrals. And it actually informed my experience while I was there too. So you can be as purposeful about it as you want, but I'm just going to side with you on this. I think there is value in it, especially if you go in to seek value. If you go in just to escape and pass the time, you know, I don't know how much you're going to get out of the Hunger Games, right? And especially like my kids will read it 5 times in a row. And I'm like, kids, you need to read something new. You can't just, you know.
Yeah. Okay, so last question for me. I think I'll consolidate it into one question so I can leave whoever else out there has a question or two to ask before I wrap it up. You can start typing your questions hopefully after. But I wanted to ask you, what was the one place you enjoyed vacating and the one comfort food, or at least food you were eating while... what is your one comfort food, and what is one place you love vacating to normally?
Okay. Wow. 2 great questions. And I've never been asked in an interview, so there you go. So my favorite place to vacation, we tend to go to new spots. My wife and I kind of have always been into travel, and we have kind of a bucket list. And it's a longer story than we have time for here. But we started getting purposeful about how old our children were and where we wanted to travel. And so like we just went to the Galapagos Islands and Machu Picchu. I had a speech in Ecuador and we kind of dovetailed it, but my kids are 12 and 11, or 12 and 10 rather, and they're just old enough to do the Machu Picchu, the physicality of some of the mountain stuff, and they're both still so into animals. The idea of looking at finches and iguanas was like absolutely over the moon fun for them, right? So we try to kind of tailor it around where we are in our life. But if there's one place I've gone to again and again, there's a little mountain village in Italy called Mitato. And my best friend, when I was living in France, bought a little farm there. And that's where I spent 5 months of my honeymoon with my wife. We quit our jobs, went backpacking around Europe, and used that little house in the mountains as our kind of our base camp. And we've been back like 4 times since, which is probably a record for us going back to the same place. So that little corner of northern Tuscany, it's not too touristy, but I love it. And that is probably my number one place. So that was a long way to get there. Favorite snack food? Is it junk food or just snack food?
Well, I was going to say comfort food. Yeah, because comfort food, I guess that could be broad. But what would you find yourself normally eating? Like, what's a staple of yours?
Wow. Okay, so comfort food, like where I go, I was thinking immediately when I was an editor in New York and I was working like 80-hour weeks, like I would get like a thing of Pringles and a couple of Brooklyn Lagers and sit on my stoop and unwind. Like, I like salty. I like salty more than sweet. So I still think that's been a pattern in my life. You know, a good beer and like some good potato chips. And
Nice.
I don't indulge in potato chips that much anymore, right? You know, I'm rounding the corner of the mid 40s and heading towards the late 40s, and just you don't get a lot of that. But it's still something that I indulge in. But I definitely save calories in my day so that at the end of the day, hopefully I can have at least one good IPA or a pale ale and maybe some sort of sausage or a snack that goes with it. I like savory and salty.
That's great. Are you standing up right now? I gather you're standing up. That is the
Yeah,
best
I've got
thing
a
to do.
standing desk. Yeah,
That is
I got a
amazing. That is great. That's the next thing I'm definitely doing. I did already an improvised one, so that's awesome. And last but not least, the topping of the whipped cream of this ice cream of a talk. I wanted to ask you, what is the one song that you cannot get out of your head?
Oh gosh, song. Can't get out of my head. You know, it's going to be horrible. It's probably something like Katy Perry because my daughter is always wanting to listen to Katy Perry right now.
Nice.
No, I don't have a good answer for that. Like, I think that right now, the default when I'm in the car is I'll put it on Pandora and I will put it on one of my writing stations, which tends to be a lot of audio that doesn't actually even have lyrics to it. Some of it's rock, you know, like surfer music, stuff like that. But it's instrumental because I find I can get into the zone faster with that sort of music going in the background. So I wish I had a better answer than that, dude. But I've got kids, and when they're in the car, it's like Imagine Dragons or Katy Perry, and I'm like, you know, I'm being a good dad. I'm just gonna go right with that.
There you go. That works. Potato chips and the Brooklyn Lager is wonderful.